She only stopped for a moment, just long enough to roll down her window and laugh. In front of her gleaming luxury car stood a man with grease-stained hands and tired eyes, the kind of man most people overlook. But that day, her mockery wasn't just cruel, it would come back to haunt her. He was a mechanic, known for fixing what others gave up on. She was a CEO, known for thinking she was untouchable. Their worlds should never have crossed. Yet fate has a way of testing arrogance, and revealing truth in the most unexpected ways. When she told him, "Fix my car and I'll marry you," she thought it was a joke. What she didn't know was that this moment would expose more than her engine's fault, it would reveal her own. Because sometimes, the people we look down on are the very ones who rise above us. And when pride collides with humility, someone always learns the hard way. So what really happened that day on the side of the road? The morning had started like any other. The air smelled of engine oil and sun-baked asphalt as Marcus Reed tightened the last bolt beneath a rusted hood. He was a mechanic in a small southern town, the kind of place where reputation mattered more than wealth, and where a man's skin color could still decide how far his talent would take him. Marcus was proud of what he built with his hands. His auto shop wasn't fancy, but it was honest. Every tool had its place, every customer left knowing he cared. He worked alone most days, radio humming softly in the corner, sunlight spilling through the cracked windows of his garage. His mother's old Bible sat on the shelf above the counter, a reminder to stay good, even when the world ain't. For Marcus, life was simple: fix cars, pay bills, stay out of trouble. He didn't dream of mansions or fame, just peace. But peace had a way of slipping through his fingers whenever pride or prejudice came roaring through his door. In town, people whispered. Some called him the best mechanic around. Others added a word before that, a word meant to remind him where they thought he belonged. Still, Marcus kept his head down. He believed skill could silence ignorance, and kindness could outlast cruelty. That morning, the sound of expensive tires crunching on gravel broke his rhythm. He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. A silver luxury car, sleek, spotless, foreign, pulled into the lot. The kind of car that didn't belong in his part of town. The kind of car owned by someone who thought the world revolved around polished chrome and power. Behind the wheel sat Clara Hensley, a name everyone knew. The youngest CEO in the county, head of a growing tech firm, always dressed like her life was an ad for success. She'd been on magazine covers, on billboards, even at charity events smiling beside politicians. But under that smile, people whispered about her temper, her sharp tongue, her cold laugh, the way she treated anyone below her like invisible furniture. Marcus had never met her, but he'd seen her kind. The kind that parked on his street only when they needed something, and forgot his name 5 minutes after driving away. She stepped out of her car that day, high heels sinking slightly into the dusty ground, sunglasses shielding eyes that looked everywhere but at him. Her engine was still running, sputtering with a faint metallic groan. Marcus greeted her politely, as he always did. "Morning, ma'am. Having some trouble?" She gave a small smirk, not of politeness, but superiority. The kind of look that said, "You wouldn't understand my world." Inside, Marcus felt that old, familiar tension tighten in his chest. He'd dealt with customers like this before, people who saw his skin before his skill. But he told himself to stay calm, stay professional. He leaned over the hood, listening, diagnosing, while she scrolled on her phone impatiently. The more he worked, the more he noticed her size. Her muttered comments about slow service, her subtle eye rolls when he explained what was wrong. And then, when he mentioned that the repair would take time, a few hours maybe, she laughed. Not kindly, not nervously, but mockingly. That laugh. It cut deeper than any insult. She leaned closer, her voice dripping with arrogance. What she said next wasn't just a joke, it was a challenge, a test of how much humiliation he'd endure before breaking. Marcus stood still, his hands trembling just slightly. He'd learned long ago that dignity was his only weapon, that silence could be stronger than anger. But even silence has limits. When she left, tires spinning dust into the air, something changed in Marcus. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter. A sense that fate had just drawn a line in the dirt, and one day soon, someone would have to cross it. Because life has a strange way of bringing people back to the very places they once looked down upon. And sometimes, the same road that carries arrogance forward also leads it straight back to humility. He didn't know it yet, but this encounter was the spark. The moment that would test his patience, his pride, and his belief in fairness itself. The moment that would turn an ordinary mechanic into the man everyone would soon be talking about. The next few days passed quietly, or at least that's how it looked on the surface. Marcus went back to his work, the rhythm of clanging metal and humming engines almost enough to drown out that laugh echoing in his head. But no matter how many cars he fixed, that sound lingered, sharp, dismissive, unforgettable. He told himself to let it go. People like her didn't change. The world wasn't built to punish arrogance, especially when arrogance wore a suit and ran a company. Still, something inside him refused to forget. Not because she mocked him, but because she represented everything he'd fought against all his life, the quiet belief that a man like him couldn't rise above his station. 2 weeks later, the storm returned. Literally. A summer downpour had turned the streets into rivers, and most people stayed home. Marcus was about to close early when headlights flashed through the rain. The same silver car slid into his lot, tires splashing through the puddles. It was her. Clara Hensley. This time, she didn't look so composed. The car was dead silent, the engine refusing to turn. She stepped out, drenched but still proud, her umbrella trembling slightly in the wind. Marcus's first instinct was caution. He didn't want trouble. But decency won over resentment. He approached slowly, his voice steady. "Car's not starting." Clara barely looked at him, but the panic in her tone betrayed her usual calm. "It just stopped, on the highway. I need it fixed now. I have a flight in 2 hours." Marcus looked under the hood, his flashlight cutting through the rain. The damage was worse than before, something had burned through, possibly from neglect. He knew it would take time. "It's the wiring. I can fix it," he said evenly, "but not before nightfall." She folded her arms. "That's not an option. You don't understand who I am." Marcus met her eyes for the first time, unflinching. "Ma'am, it doesn't matter who you are. Engines don't care about titles." For the first time, she seemed uncertain, like no one had ever spoken to her that way. She looked away, muttering something under her breath. But before Marcus could respond, a police car rolled up. 2 officers stepped out, eyes moving from Clara's expensive car to Marcus's work clothes and dark skin. Their hands rested casually near their holsters, like habit. "Everything all right here, ma'am?" one asked. Clara opened her mouth, hesitated, then forced a smile. "Yes. He's helping me." But the officer's gaze didn't move from Marcus. Helping? Or bothering? The tone hit him like a punch. It wasn't new, it was the same one he'd heard since he was a teenager. Suspicion disguised as authority. Marcus kept his hands visible. "Just doing my job, officer." "Got ID?" Marcus swallowed, wiping his hands before reaching for his wallet. He could feel Clara watching, maybe realizing for the first time what it felt like to be looked at like a threat. After a tense minute, the officers left, but the silence that followed was heavy. Marcus turned back to his tools. Clara didn't speak for a while. Then, quietly, "Does that happen often?" He didn't answer directly. "Depends who's watching." She didn't reply. For the first time, her confidence seemed to crack. Over the next few hours, Marcus worked in the rain while Clara waited under the garage awning. The storm howled, thunder rolling over the sound of clinking metal. Every so often, she'd glance at him, not with superiority, but with curiosity. When the engine finally roared to life, the sound echoed like justice. Marcus stepped back, drenched and exhausted. Clara reached for her purse. "How much?" He shook his head. "No charge." Her eyebrows lifted. "Why not?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Some lessons are free." She didn't understand it then, but the moment stuck. The next morning, social media exploded. A photo was circulating. Someone had taken a picture of Marcus standing beside Clara's car in the rain, police lights flashing behind them. The caption read, "Within hours, the image became a storm of assumptions." Some mocked Clara for slumming it. Others painted Marcus as a potential threat. Old prejudices resurfaced, uglier than ever. Marcus tried to ignore it, but soon reporters began showing up at his shop. They wanted the story, twisting it into drama, the poor mechanic and the powerful CEO. Clara's PR team called him, asking him not to talk to anyone. She was worried about her image. Her company's stock had dipped overnight. For Marcus, it wasn't about fame or money. It was about truth. For once, the world was seeing what he'd seen his whole life, how easily perception turned into prejudice. He stayed silent, letting the world argue. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. A week later, Clara showed up again, this time without makeup, without the armor of wealth. She looked tired, human. "I need your help," she said quietly. "The story's out of control. I want to make it right." Marcus didn't answer at first. He watched her struggle with words, the same woman who once laughed at him now searching for humility. "What do you want to make right?" he finally asked. She hesitated. "I was wrong. About you. About people. About a lot." It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was something. Together, they agreed to do an interview, one that told the real story. Marcus insisted it wouldn't be about her guilt or his race, but about respect. About how easy it is to judge someone until life humbles you. The night before the interview, Marcus couldn't sleep. He thought about his father, who'd once told him, "You can't teach people to see you right, son. You just keep showing up until they can't ignore what's true." The next morning, the studio lights felt blinding. The interviewer began gently, asking about the viral photo. Clara spoke first, her voice steady but remorseful. She admitted how she had misjudged Marcus, how she had laughed out of arrogance, and how that moment had exposed her own flaws more than his. Then it was Marcus's turn. He didn't talk about pain or pride. He talked about humanity, the kind that hides under fear, under habit, under generations of silence. He said he didn't need an apology. What he needed was change. By the time the interview ended, the air in the room felt different. Even the crew seemed quieter, thoughtful. That clip went viral again, but this time for the right reasons. People shared it not because of scandal, but because of the honesty it carried. Yet not everyone was ready to change. The backlash came fast. Anonymous messages, hate comments, people saying Marcus had played the race card. Clara received threats from those who thought she had betrayed her own. The world had seen their moment, but only a few understood it. And just when Marcus thought things might settle, a letter arrived at his shop. It was from a law firm representing one of Clara's business rivals. They wanted Marcus to testify against her in an ethics case, claiming she had exploited him for sympathy. Marcus sat with the letter for hours. Signing it could make him famous, even rich. Refusing meant staying invisible again. But fame wasn't what he'd fought for. He folded the letter quietly, placed it in a drawer, and locked it. That evening, he closed his garage early and stepped outside. The same road stretched before him, the one Clara had once laughed on. But this time, he wasn't the same man. For once, he felt seen. Not because the world had changed overnight, but because he had. Still, somewhere deep inside, he knew this story wasn't finished. The world loves redemption, but it loves tearing it down even faster. He looked at the setting sun and wondered, was this peace, or just the calm before another storm? The air was heavy that evening, thick with summer heat and tension that no breeze could cool. The world had moved on from the viral story, but in a small town like theirs, people didn't forget. They just waited for the next reason to judge. For weeks, Marcus had gone back to his routine, turning wrenches, fixing engines, pretending that fame hadn't brushed past his life and left a mark. The shop was quieter now. Some old customers stopped coming, afraid of getting involved. Others showed up just to take pictures. He didn't blame them. That's how people were, curious about pain as long as it wasn't their own. But beneath his calm, something restless stirred. Ever since that interview, he'd felt the fragile weight of visibility. One mistake, one rumor, and everything could collapse. And then, one morning, it did. He arrived at the shop to find his front window shattered. The word spray-painted across the wall burned into his chest. Stay in your place. He stood there for a long time, staring at the jagged glass glinting in the sunlight. The street was empty, but he knew eyes were watching, from cars, from windows, from silence. He cleaned up the mess without calling the police. He'd seen how that story usually ended, paperwork, pity, and no justice. So he worked through the day, pretending not to feel the sting of humiliation. But that night, Clara showed up again. This time, she wasn't the polished CEO or the reformed public figure. She was just a woman, pale and trembling, holding her phone. They're blaming you, she said quietly. Online. They're saying you did it yourself, for attention. Marcus didn't look up. I figured. I tried to stop it, she continued, stepping closer. But they're saying the interview was staged, that we made it all up. Marcus let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. People will believe anything that fits their comfort. Clara hesitated, guilt flickering in her eyes. I want to help. He looked at her, tired but composed. You already did. You listened. But it wasn't over, not yet. A week later, Marcus was invited to speak at a local diversity event, a gathering meant to celebrate unity. The same mayor who'd ignored his business for years now wanted him on stage. At first, he refused. But Clara convinced him. People need to hear your voice, she said. So he agreed. The auditorium was packed that night, reporters, townsfolk, business leaders, all eager to witness the story they'd once twisted. Marcus stood behind the curtain, palms sweating, heart steady but heavy. Clara was sitting in the front row. When the announcer called his name, the applause was polite, measured, cautious. He stepped up to the microphone, his reflection shining faintly in the glass teleprompter. He began simply, speaking not as a victim or a symbol, but as a man. He talked about dignity, about work, about the quiet kind of strength it takes to be decent in an indecent world. He spoke of his father's lessons, of the day Clara's car broke down, and how every human interaction is a test, some we pass, some we fail. And then he paused. Somewhere in the audience, a voice interrupted. You're just milking it for fame. A few others murmured in agreement. Phones lifted, recording. Marcus felt the room tighten around him. He took a slow breath. If telling the truth looks like fame to you, he said calmly, then maybe you've never had to fight to be heard. But the tension didn't ease. Another shout came, sharper this time. You people always play the victim. That phrase, those two words, cut deeper than glass. Clara stood up, furious. That's enough, she shouted, but the noise drowned her out. The audience began to splinter, some clapping, others jeering. Reporters leaned forward, waiting for chaos. Marcus could have walked off. No one would have blamed him. But instead, he leaned closer to the mic, voice low, steady, unshakable. I'm not here to make you comfortable, he said. I'm here to remind you that comfort is what built walls like these in the first place. The room went silent. For a moment, even the air seemed to hold its breath. Then, a crash. A bottle hit the stage near his feet, shattering. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Security rushed forward, lights flickering, voices shouting over one another. Clara climbed onto the stage, grabbing Marcus's arm. We need to go, now. He hesitated, glancing back at the mess, the crowd, the cameras still rolling. This is what truth costs, he murmured. They pushed through the chaos together, exiting into the humid night. Sirens wailed in the distance. Outside, the parking lot buzzed with confrontation, some defending Marcus, others shouting insults. The same faces that once smiled for pictures now twisted with anger. Clara's car was waiting, the same silver machine that started it all. They got in, hearts pounding, headlights cutting through the darkness. As they drove, Clara spoke quietly. "You shouldn't have to live like this. You did nothing wrong." Marcus stared out the window, his reflection ghosted against the glass. Doing nothing wrong has never been enough. For a long time, neither spoke. The road stretched endlessly, lined with shadows and silence. Then, flashing lights behind them. A police car. Clara tensed. "Are we speeding?" Marcus checked the dashboard. "No." The siren wailed once, commanding. He pulled over. The officer approached slowly, hand resting on his holster. Marcus rolled down the window, keeping both hands visible. "Evening, officer," he said evenly. "License and registration," came the reply. Clara fumbled through the glove box, her voice shaking. "Officer, is there a problem?" The officer's flashlight scanned the interior, lingering on Marcus. "Got a report of a disturbance downtown. Matches the description of this vehicle." Clara's tone rose slightly. "We were at the event. You can check." But Marcus stopped her with a glance. He knew that tone. That energy. This wasn't about verification, it was about control. The officer's eyes narrowed. "Step out of the car." Marcus obeyed slowly. The rain had started again, soft at first, then heavy. Clara tried to follow, but another officer appeared, motioning her back. The first officer moved closer. "You were the one on stage, right? Stirring things up." Marcus didn't answer. "Yeah," the man continued. "You people love attention, don't you?" Lightning flashed. For a split second, Marcus saw his own reflection in the officer's sunglasses, calm, defiant, tired. Then the shove came. Not hard, but enough to send a message. Enough to remind him how quickly power can turn into punishment. Clara screamed from the car. "Stop." He didn't do anything. Phones were recording again, from bystanders, from across the street. Another story, another spectacle. Marcus raised his hands. "I'm not resisting." The rain poured harder. The officer shouted something he couldn't hear. The world blurred into sirens, shouts, thunder, and fear. Then, silence. When Marcus opened his eyes again, he was on the ground, soaked and shaking. A bystander knelt beside him. The officers were gone. So was Clara. Confusion washed over him like the rain itself. People whispered. Someone handed him his phone. The screen showed a video, his face, the officer, the shove. Already posted. Already spreading. This time, the caption read, "Mechanic who spoke out gets silenced." The comments were pouring in, some outraged, some mocking, all loud. The truth was already out of his control. He stood slowly, feeling the ache in his ribs, the sting of humiliation, the weight of every headline that reduced his life to a headline. Somewhere, through the noise of it all, he heard Clara's voice calling his name. She was running toward him, drenched, terrified, clutching her phone. "They saw everything," she said breathlessly. "It's all over the news already." Marcus didn't answer. He just stared at the flickering screen, the reflection of the storm in his eyes. "Let them see," he finally said. "Let them all see." The rain kept falling, relentless, cleansing, unforgiving. Because in that moment, Marcus understood something he'd never said out loud. That justice doesn't always come through peace. Sometimes, it comes through exposure. Through the raw, uncomfortable truth the world refuses to face until it's forced to watch. He turned away from the flashing lights, from the chaos, from the cameras, and walked back toward his shop, soaked but unbroken. Behind him, the sirens faded into the night, but the echoes of that moment would not. The next morning, the world would wake to another viral video. Another headline. Another debate. But for Marcus, it was no longer about proving his worth. It was about showing what happens when silence finally speaks. Because sometimes, the loudest sound isn't a shout. It's the quiet refusal to bow. And as dawn broke over the drenched asphalt, Marcus Reed, mechanic, target, survivor, kept walking. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. The morning after the storm, the town was quiet. The streets that had once whispered judgment now buzzed with tension and disbelief. Everyone had seen the video. The same people who had once mocked Marcus were now glued to their screens, watching, rewinding, arguing. The footage was everywhere, Marcus standing in the rain, calm and unarmed, facing officers who saw threat instead of truth. The internet had done what it always does, spread the image faster than justice could catch up. Some saw bravery. Others saw another headline. But this time felt different. Because the woman who once laughed at him, Clara Hensley, wasn't silent. That same morning, Clara went live on national television. Her voice trembled as she spoke, not from fear, but from realization. She told the world everything, how she had mocked Marcus, how he had shown her kindness anyway, how she had watched him treated like a suspect for simply existing. She didn't speak like a CEO. She spoke like someone finally seeing the world without the filter of privilege. This isn't about one mechanic, she said, her eyes glistening under studio lights. It's about every person who's had to prove their humanity before being believed. Her words ignited something. Within hours, the video of her speech joined Marcus's on social media, creating a wave too big to silence. Activists, journalists, even politicians began demanding answers. The police department was forced to issue a statement. Investigations opened. Protests formed, not violent, but powerful. People stood outside the courthouse with signs that read, "Respect is not a privilege. Justice needs no color." Marcus watched it all from the corner of his small garage, unsure how to feel. Fame wasn't comfort. Recognition wasn't peace. But seeing people talk, not just about him, but about something larger, felt like a weight lifting, if only slightly. For days, he stayed quiet, avoiding interviews. The media wanted his anger, his tears, his pain packaged into a soundbite. But Marcus wasn't interested in being a symbol. He wanted something real, something lasting. So instead of speaking, he built. He repaired the shattered window of his shop himself. Then, he replaced the spray-painted wall with a new sign. It didn't advertise repairs or prices. It simply read, "No one is beneath respect." People started stopping by, not just for car repairs, but to talk. Some apologized for past ignorance. Others came to listen. Young men who looked like Marcus found hope in his story. Older men who had lived through worse nodded quietly, proud but cautious. Change didn't come overnight. It never does. But the ripples were there. A month later, Clara visited again. She wasn't the same woman who once laughed in his face. Her eyes carried humility, maybe even redemption. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly. "Not just for what you did for me, but for what you made me see." Marcus smiled faintly. "I didn't make you see anything. The truth was always there. You just stopped looking away." She laughed gently, almost tearfully. Maybe that's the first step. They stood in silence for a while, the hum of the garage filling the space between words. For once, there was no tension, just understanding. As she left, she handed Marcus an envelope. Inside was a document, an offer. She wanted to partner with him to launch a program for underrepresented youth in technical trades. A scholarship, a mentorship, a chance for kids like Marcus to learn, build, and be seen. He hesitated at first. He wasn't used to foundations or fancy causes. But then he thought about the message behind it, not charity, but opportunity. "All right," he said finally. "But we do it my way, no pity. Just respect." Clara nodded. That's exactly the point. Months turned into seasons. The story that began as humiliation grew into something far greater. The scholarship program spread beyond the town. News outlets revisited the story, This time not as tragedy, but as transformation. Marcus's face appeared on magazine covers he'd once used to wipe grease from his hands. Not as a headline. As a symbol of dignity. But he never changed who he was. He still opened the shop every morning at dawn. Still fixed cars with the same care. Still kept his mother's Bible on the shelf. Because Marcus knew something the world often forgot. Real change doesn't start on a screen, it starts in how we treat each other when no one's watching. He never sought revenge, only recognition of humanity. And that, in the end, became his quiet victory. One evening, he locked up the shop and walked the same road where Clara's car had first broken down. The sky was painted gold with sunset. He stopped at the spot, now marked by faint tire tracks long faded. He thought about how a single moment, one cruel laugh, one act of kindness, one recording, had set everything in motion. How the world can turn an ordinary man into a mirror, forcing society to confront its reflection. He closed his eyes and let the breeze move through the trees. For the first time in a long time, he felt peace, not because the world was fixed, but because he had learned to stand unbroken within it. Injustice hadn't disappeared. Prejudice hadn't vanished. But somewhere, in classrooms, in boardrooms, in garages, conversations had started, real ones. The kind that build bridges, not walls. Marcus didn't need applause or hashtags. He just needed to know that maybe, somewhere down the line, a boy like him would walk into a room and be seen for his skill before his skin. Weeks later, Clara's foundation officially launched. The opening ceremony was small, intimate. Marcus stood on stage, not as a victim, not as a story, but as a teacher. He spoke briefly, simply, powerfully. I used to think silence was safety, he said. That if I stayed out of the way, I'd be left alone. But silence doesn't protect, it just hides truth in the dark. The world doesn't change when we avoid discomfort. It changes when we face it. The crowd was still. Some cried. Others nodded. Cameras flashed, but this time, Marcus didn't mind. Because this time, the light didn't blind him. It revealed him. After the ceremony, as night fell, Marcus stood outside looking up at the stars. Clara joined him quietly. Do you ever wonder, she asked, if all of this was meant to happen? Marcus thought for a moment. Maybe not meant, he said. But maybe necessary. She nodded slowly. Necessary for who? He looked at her, then at the horizon. For everyone still pretending they don't see. And as the camera fades, the kind of cinematic fade that carries more silence than sound, Marcus's voice echoes in narration. Every story about injustice feels like a storm. It starts with noise, shouts, headlines, anger. But after the rain, you see what survived. Sometimes it's just a man with calloused hands who refused to break. Sometimes it's a heart that finally learned to listen. The truth is, racism doesn't end when the world apologizes. It ends when the next person refuses to look away. The screen lingers on Marcus's sign, lit softly under the street lamp. No one is beneath respect. Then, his voice one last time, quiet, steady, unforgettable. The question isn't whether change is possible. The question is, how many more storms will it take before we make it permanent?